when we're considering inputs, what that question gets at is, do you guys do a good job of, after you have made the promise to me that I can be successful by accepting me, you made me that promise when you said, yes, you can come to school here. Because it's good faith, right? We're not going to admit students that we're like, you're not really going to graduate, but we just need you for a little while.
I hope not.
So you have made a promise. Forget about your guidebooks and your walk and all of that kind of stuff. When you accept a student, you're telling them you can be successful here. And the question of, do students like me, that look like me, that are first generation students, that have accessibility needs, that are women, whatever that thing is, do you graduate students like me from here? Happy Tuesday. Hello, everyone joining us.
It's another cap and gown.
I'm Rachel Phillips-Buck, the VP for Student Success, joined by Matt Boisvert, our president. Good to see you all.
Great to see everyone.
Yeah, and especially today, because I know that it is a busy, busy time on our campuses. So thank you guys for joining. Those of you who are joining us, hey, Holly, joining us later in the week, thank you for making time for Cap and Gown. We're really excited to spend time with you today talking about conditions for student success, specifically about commitment. So I'm looking forward to this. Matt, do you want to talk about how to get connected to us?
I think, yeah, absolutely. It's really easy. Just go to taplink.cc/Ferris Resources. That's all the ways you can see all the things that we're doing. You can find us on LinkedIn. Of course, for those of you who are listening to the podcast, if you want to join us live through Zoom, but also all of our YouTube and podcasts, you can access all of that from going to our tap link.
Absolutely. Okay, so let me tell you what we're going to talk about today, State of the Union, which we are going to spend a lot of time on State of the Union because there are some really awesome things going on that I want to highlight for you guys. And then we're going to pause for just a minute because remember, conditions for student success and retention, we're going to do just like a little reminder of some of the context as we're talking about retention and student success. And then this is one of my favorite things that you teach, Matt, about the Promise Triangle. So we're going to spend some time there. And then like always, we'll give you action items.
It's great.
Okay. So can I start with the State of the Union? Okay. I am very happy about these State of the Union things because I think there's some really great conversations to be had around each of these articles. So the first one is the big talk of the day that Pfizer got their vaccine approved. So it's no longer the, what do they call it? Like emergency. So it's being rebranded, of course. It's called Comirnaty. Okay. Comirnaty. Okay. So when you see that commercials for that, you'll know what that is. But basically what this just means is that a lot of schools now feel like they can make requirements for students to get them. Although, we've been talking for a long time about campuses who've been working hard to incentivize without having to do any sort of mandate. University of Richmond's a great example. So they have not done a mask mandate, but they are at 93% vaccination. Wow. So really exciting to see. And they have really pressed just taking care of their community, that everyone wants to be there opening in person. They're not doing hybrid classes. And they're saying the way for us to have a full experience together is for everybody, to go get vaccinated. So I'll be interested to see what happens on different campuses with that news. But that's not the most exciting thing, if you can believe it. Okay, there's an article inside Higher Ed. It's called The Human Cost of Stranded Credits. Okay, so withholding course credits from students because of outstanding balances on unpaid fees and tuition owed to their college has long-lasting negative effects, especially on our low income students and students of color. So Ithaca S&R Report, which is a higher education consulting firm, just did this study in the last year. It estimates students nationwide owe colleges and universities up to $15 billion in unpaid fees.
Wow.
And about 6.6 million students might be weighed down by stranded credits. So this is getting increased attention because in the middle of the pandemic, you have a lot of community colleges, minority serving institutions using their Corona money to wipe out debt for students. More than 20 historically Black colleges and universities cleared out students' outstanding balances with their Corona money. So Matt, first of all, you and I were talking about stranded credits, which is the worst of the worst for a student who does not finish college.
Absolutely. And this is the thing that we've talked about. Like, as we go to a school, we try to understand what is the policy at the business office, especially for a lot of our schools where every student matters, for them to be able to meet their enrollment goals. So so many times when you think about, well, it goes back to UT San Antonio. They were the ones who really brought this to my attention, where they did a study and they found that we have students who stopped because they had $150 in parking tickets and they couldn't pay. And so just that.
And so they can't go anywhere else. They can't finish their degree because of this amount of money. So the City University of New York just released transcripts of students and graduates with unpaid tuitions and fees and lifted financial holds on 74,000 student accounts during the pandemic, which is amazing. Yeah. Trinity Washington University, which is a private Hispanic serving and predominantly Black institution in DC, has a policy of withholding credits and prohibiting students from re-enrolling if they owe $4,000 or more. They just waived that policy for the 2020-2021 school year and used their COVID relief funds to cover $2.3 million in unpaid balances for 535 undergraduates.
Wow.
So lifting of that now all of a sudden means that they can enroll. It says Trinity says they usually lose between 200 and 300 students per year. Wow. Because of debt to the institution. So their average student income is $25,000. So these are students who really do not have the money to pay $4,000 so that they can re-enroll. Yeah.
So Rachel, just thinking about that, it seems like for a lot of schools, they act like students' credits are, it's interesting that we call them credits, but that it's not on credit, it's on layaway. Like, right. Oh no, you can't have it until it's fully paid off. And I just wonder, if you could invest in that student or give them the credit and say, hey, we know you're going to be more likely able to pay for this once you graduate. It's a whole point. So
yeah. So it's really interesting. Wayne State University in Detroit has this whole program that they were working with their students for. What they said was they identified a large number of students at their school. Many of them had close to 100 credits, but we're not done yet. So we're not really talking about like freshmen came for their first year and then that's it. We're saying like they have had sustained progress forward academically, and then something happened where they couldn't pay for their credits. So
wow.
One of my challenges is at all of our institutions to be thinking about those stranded credits and how we are helping students get transcripts, re-enroll in classes. How do we give them sort of this pipeline to be able to move forward to be successful? I love that so much.
That's great.
Okay, a new law was just passed in Oregon about transparency in textbook prices. So the governor just signed this into law in June. It says that public institutions need to prominently display at least 75% of the estimated cost for credit course materials by the time the student enrolls for the course. So you have to say like, yes, it's going to cost you this much in tuition, but then this is what the book is going to cost you. And really what they're trying to do is just make it more accessible. You can imagine, I mean, when we were in school, books were expensive, much less now, hundreds and hundreds of dollars that you might not be counting on. You enroll in the course and then you go and you have to pay for these books. So you were saying, Matt, I mean, I love the model of just like include books.
Right. Well,
why are we?
I mean, is this required for this class? Yes, these are all required. So
yeah. Yeah, so we should just include books and then we don't have that same difficulty. Okay, this is another one that I'm super excited about. It's hard, it's a tongue twister, but it's really important. Fee-free college applications gain popularity. So I like this one because Trinity College in Connecticut, different Trinity than we talked about before, has just omitted their application fee. When they did that, applications and those committed to enroll in Trinity for first generation college students jumped from 8% to 12%. Wow. So the idea is that this application fee is keeping some first generation students from applying to different schools. Just to give you context, Stanford, I think, has the highest application fee. It's $90, but Stanford costs $79,000 a year to go to. So a lot of schools are like between 50 and 70 for the application fee. Dickinson College in Pennsylvania is waiving their $65 fee for anyone who fills out the application. Here's what's so interesting, Matt. Dickinson had 6,300 applications when they had their $65 fee.
Okay.
So that's $400,000 in lost revenue because they've waived this application fee. So you have some people who are like, we cannot waive this fee because it's a huge chunk, right?
To be honest, Rachel, no one at a university should be building application fees into the revenue model. Like, hey, the way we're going to stay solvent is application fees.
So when this school, so McDaniel's College did this 3 years ago, when they dropped their application fee, which was $55, their applications increased 30%. And they got 5,000 applications last year. So basically, it's this measurement of like, if we get more people to apply and we have a better idea of, you know, who would like to come to our school if we're not doing the application, then you can enroll them and lead them through to student success and get tuition money from them instead of, you know, depending on your $65 fee for your $500,000 in application fee. The other weird thing, Matt, is that you have some enrollment managers saying, we don't like dropping the application fee because it messes up our yields. You get a lot more people, but then maybe they don't really want to go to your school. And so there's a lot of conversation around kind of the business practice of dropping this, but I don't think anyone would question whether or not for students, especially students who are first generation or Pell Grant recipients, those sorts of things, it's a great passageway into your institution.
I would think there's got to be some middle ground where you could say, based on, you know, the student's financial need, hey, we're going to give you either a refund of that, or we're going to give
a waiver. So some schools are saying that if you apply, if you say, hey, will you please give me a waiver for this, that they would never turn anybody down. So surely there's some middle ground in it. Okay, I have two more for you. Ozark Community College is offering students free breakfast, which I think we're seeing at a lot of like all of our AISD K-12 in our state or city are doing this, offering free breakfast to students. This is a community college. Here's what I think is fascinating. So the Missouri College piloted Eagle Breakfast at its Springfield campus for January 2021, but now they're going to expand to all 6 of their campuses. Okay. During the spring 2021 semester, 635 students participated in Eagle Breakfast, including 231 Pell recipients and 45 veterans. The institution found that those who took advantage of the program received better grades on midterms and final exams. 89% of the Eagle Breakfast participants finished their spring classes, compared to 83% of those who did not participate. Okay, so 6% difference. And 78% of Eagle Breakfast participants got a C or higher in all of their courses, compared to 73% of their classmates who did not participate. So a 5% difference. So this is, again, they're applying COVID funds, but I love this because it's such a great example of identify, connect, solve, and measure, right?
Absolutely. Well,
like you're investing, it makes a difference. We should do that more.
And also, I just think about how that student's day is changed. So how you've changed behavior. Maybe, these are students who not only are they being fed, but they're starting their day maybe focused. This gives them that space to be focused on the work that they have ahead. But it also, as we're talking about commitment to student success, and today, as we talk about your promise, it's going to be really neat to see how that lines up with everything we're talking about.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, and the last one's a short one. You guys remember West Virginia Wesleyan College, who was going to charge students $750 if they got vaccinated. COVID. Well, if they're not vaccinated, not if they got COVID, but just in general. Like if you want to come, they changed their mind. Apparently that was not going great. And so now they're like, or we will just charge you $5 every time we test you.
Okay.
That's probably a better idea. So I told you last time, I didn't think it was a great idea to do that. I didn't think it was going to rub people the right way. So they apparently got some feedback about that and they have changed their mind. And that is the State of the Union. I think you should start summing up that way, don't you? And that is the State of the Union. I like it.
That's great. Thank you, Rachel. As we talked about last week and introduced Conditions for Student Success, which comes from Vincent Tinto, last week we just talked about it kind of a high level, these 6 different conditions. And today we're going to focus on commitment. And again, just thinking about Tinto and his whole mindset was, you cannot say that you're giving access or admitting students without supporting them. If you don't support them, that is not opportunity. And so
as we're talking about having debts and stranded credit, right? That is not opportunity. That's actually worse off than if they hadn't had that access.
100 hours stranded, that is not opportunity.
No, for sure not. So I do want to talk about, before we dive into commitment, I just want to give some context for student success and retention. And I'm very curious, for those of you who are joining us, who is in charge of retention on your campus? You all know this is a loaded question, because I'm going to tell you about the admissions model and how it's evolved and how it's very similar to retention. But if you have somebody on your campus who is in charge of retention or in charge of student success, will you please chat what the title is of that person? I'm really curious because schools do this in such different ways. And part of, related to who's in charge of retention, I always ask, what are they actually in charge of? Right? Like, so do they have power to say, we're going to change this, or we're going to do this, or we're going to do this differently? So what are they actually in charge of? What do they have power or control over? And then also, how are they making decisions that then are going to affect that retention equation that we've been talking about? Yeah. So we have people who kind of have a task force. Everybody. So, hey, Rose Boom, saying the senior director for student success is in charge of retention. Matt, you and I have talked about how retention continues to develop like admissions did, which you remember 20 or 30 years ago when you said who's in charge of admissions, everybody was, right? Everybody's like, tell your friends they should come to school here. It was not like this.
The idea of enrollment management as a profession didn't really start until the mid 80s. And so now you start to see that, where, as Dr. Rose Boom is pointing out, while we do have a person who is a director for student success.
Yeah, absolutely. So thinking about, like Lindsay is saying, right? Like there is a person who has this title of student success specialist, depending on where you are. Sometimes it's under academic success. Sometimes it's on the student development side of the house. There are a lot of different models for how schools are thinking about retention. And Matt, you and I always say retention very similarly to admissions. We recommend that the person in charge of retention directly reports to the president or somebody very, very high up on in the institution, because retention, remember, is an outcome of that equation, right, which is inputs and then your institutional factors. And so if you don't have somebody who's able to exert some influence and decision-making on both of those things, but somehow is responsible for the outcome, that's a really hard place for anyone to be.
And I would say now, and another challenge is how close are they to other campus partners, especially enrollment management, who's so involved on shaping that input for your campus.
Yeah, absolutely. Because like we talked about last week, if you change that input, then you've got to change a lot of your institutional factors and other things that you do. So I also would just like to say, in terms of context, remember that retention changes in small numbers. So a 1% increase, a 2% increase, 3%, those are good increases. And that comes after a lot of really hard work. It will make a difference on your institution's financial health, even those small changes. You know why we get so excited when we have a lot of schools who've worked with us and have 12% increases or 10% increases. That's amazing. And it does fundamentally change their institutional health, but also small changes can add up and really make a difference. So I love that.
And I think sustainable. So, when you're having year over year, more smaller gains, what you're doing is you're shaping your culture. And as we talk about just the overall, the dynamic on your campus to be able to manage the students that you are serving. And so definitely the schools that have those 10, 12%, we love it. What they've done is a significant investment and a change in culture that has led them to that.
Real commitment, right? That is real commitment to this issue of student success and retention. Okay, the last thing before we move on to the Promise Triangle, which I'm trying to restrain my excitement about because I really do love it, is I'm thinking about how often we hear on a campus a sort of made up number of retention goal. Yeah. And so, the president is like, I want to increase it 10%, or I think we should be at 87, or you have to do so it's very hard to figure out the right way to get at the goal. And also if it's not arrived at in some sort of logical way, I'm very demoralized, right? If I'm a practitioner, because I'm just like, how is that possible for me to be able to get there? So you and Viva with Retention Intelligence actually help schools work towards a manageable goal for retention, right?
Yeah. So just having that understanding, I think one of the scary things is when your retention goal is set by someone on the financial side, and they're isolated from all the work that goes on in the black box. And they're separated really from the factors on the input side that could negatively impact retention rates historically. So when a CFO comes and just says, well, I think we'll hit our budgets if we get to 76%, and you're looking at their data, and it's going to be very challenging for them to get to that place, and the stress that then places on the people on the front lines who are doing the engagement, and also the stress in the relationship between enrollment management and the people who are engaged in student success. Definitely stress on the relationship with faculty who see that. So how do you come to what is a realistic goal when you're setting a retention number? I mean, that's very important, and you have to know what your inputs are. So given where we are right now and our capacity, like we talked about last week, to serve our inputs, then what should we expect? And this is where Viva built an incredible workbook based on all of the iPads and college scorecard data, where we're now able to look at, based on this institution, who are all their comparable schools, looking at a wide range of factors. And a lot of times it's interesting because when we're looking at who we would say based on input, these are comparable schools. These are a comp group that institution has never looked at before.
Because you're thinking, Matt, about not like it's not admissions. It's not where are you losing students? Like they're going to either go to this school or this school. You're actually looking at like, what are institutions that if we're looking at the input, they have similar Pell Grant recipients, they have similar ACTs, right? They have similar stem cell majors.
STEM. Yeah.
Stem cell. STEM majors. That's a different thing. Different.
Right. And so being able to have an understanding of, okay, so this is the percentage of our population that are first generation, that are Pell recipients, that receive federal loans, looking at ACT, SAT, which this year you can kind of throw that out because those are optional now, but also like the size of the institution, how selective is the institution, and also where is that institution located? Is this a rural campus? Is this a suburban or in an urban environment? All of those things influence exactly what we were saying last week. So I love thinking about a school where I was able to sit across from the president and show these are schools that we would say are comps. There's 16. You're right now ranked number 10 in retention. If we just move you to the middle, this is where we think you should be at least in the middle, which would increase your retention goal by 5%. And I feel very confident with FAIRS 360, we can get you there. Yeah. And then you have the stretch goal of the school that's remarkable, fit all the same inputs, but I mean, they're on the list of colleges that change students' lives. Like they're all in. They've invested a lot in
committed. Yeah.
They're committed. So it is helpful to build that out and to go to your CFO and say, you set a goal of 78%. That would top out the best school in our list of comps. And
given the students that we are serving, this is what we can expect reasonably. Okay. So I think that's an important piece. We're happy to talk with any or all of you about kind of that process, because I think it is pretty remarkable for retention intelligence to be able to deliver that to schools and to have a reasonable conversation about what you should be shooting for and how you can think, to increase. All right. So now, Matt, let's move on to the promise triangle. And I'm going to set it up and then you and I will have some conversations as you explain this to us. But the promise triangle is really a way for us to measure and understand commitment on a campus. And it's a way for us to kind of very specifically break down different places where you need commitment in order to make a difference. And a way for all of our listeners to identify both the things that you are killing it at, and then also the places where you're like, hey, that is a place where we struggle and we really have some difficulty. So will you explain this to us?
Yeah. So thank you, Rachel. The promise triangle comes from my background in services marketing and understanding what's happening for the kind of the meta institution brand. If you think about your institution, what I'm saying is it's your leadership, it's all of your brochures and your website and your mission statement. And what are you saying to parents and to students about who you are? And so that's that first top piece is your institution. Yeah.
Sorry, I just was going to describe this for those of you who are joining us on podcast. So if you think about a triangle, at the very top of that triangle, it's your institution. To the left, it's faculty and staff at that point. And then on the right, it's students. So imagine that triangle with all of those different elements.
Okay. So the ultimately what this should lead to is, okay, so what are we promising and how are we lining all of these things up in our interactions between the institution and the students, the interaction between the students and the faculty and staff, and then also faculty and staff and the institution itself. So let me go a little bit further in depth here. If we just look at between the institution and the students, this again is the interaction where the promises are being made. This is where you're saying, this is who we are. This is why you should come here. This is what we deliver when you're here. And this is the outcome you should expect when you leave here. And so there's a whole lot of promises that are made in that. And one of the challenges is that a couple of things. I'm sure for none of our listeners, you've ever been in a situation where the institution overpromised, but it happens where you're saying, this is all that you can experience. You're going to have a great time, but they haven't told anyone about that. So
Matt, I'm thinking about
Inside.
just like the visit day, just to break down every element of that, right? Where it's like, here's the cafeteria. We are promising you, this is what it's going to be like. And, on some campuses, it's like, it's a visit day because the food's way better, right? That would be an overpromise. Like, oh, we have steak every day. No, just on days when these students are here. These are the rest halls that you're going to be in. This is the faculty member that we're going to take you to so that you can hear a class because he's a superstar. But all of these things are promises that we are making our students about what their experience is going to be like on campus. And I'm very curious in this messaging, what institutions are saying about student success. Because there is this like very rosy picture of look, and then here's what you're going to experience here. And you and I talk about like when somebody says, here's the magnet for beacon on your campus. If something happens with your student, you can call them. Parents and students don't think that that's about them, right? They think I'm not going to have any trouble. It's going to be, it's going to be great.
Right.
Yeah. Do you want to say more about the student success?
Well, so you have the case where schools say a lot, and they promise a lot. And then you also have the case where there's a lot happening and the institution doesn't know all that's happening. And so it's not a part of the promise. It's not communicated. Students and parents prospective students are not hearing about that. And so that's a real missed opportunity. So I think about Centenary and how remarkable they are with their accessibility services and how that word's gotten out. Well, imagine if you're doing all that work and the people over in admissions don't know that and don't know how to communicate about that. That's a really sad missed opportunity. So that does happen. That's one of those fun things, Rachel. I think about your work with Discovery and how you were building that. And that became like, oh, we need to do a better job of telling that all the work that goes into career exploration, because it really is remarkable. So there may be cases where promises should be made, should be communicated because it's an opportunity to reach new students. But one thing that I was thinking about on this side of making promises is through the lens of student success. So as you described, campus tours, and everything everything is the best. We make sure they see all of the best parts of the university. If you were to say to your leadership, hey, I want to build a student success tour, and I would like for you to go on that tour with us. And so through the lens of a student who is that student who needs the most help, they're at risk, they're coming in, maybe they're first gen, they're Pell, they have a lower ACT, whatever the factors are for your campus, we want to build a student success tour. What would go into that tour? Where would you take them and what would you say? And for a lot of our schools, there are great things to say that leadership has no idea is going on, but there are other things like, hey, we're going to go to the basement of this building because that's where you stuck us. Or the person who's doing all of this great work is not even on campus. So if we want to give them access to that person, we're going to have to take a golf cart and drive across the street into this building that's not even connected to the campus, right?
Yeah. So Matt, thinking that through just in terms of where are the places and the people that are built specifically for student success that you would want to take parents to. And I'm thinking about so many of our schools that, when I talk about holistic care of our students, and they've named Fairs 360 something on their campus. And I'm like, put it in the syllabus, put it on the website, talk about it. Like, this is a place where we can say, oh, look, we have this whole mechanism for student success. People are going to see you, and we're going to connect with you, and we're going to solve these problems. And that is a really tangible, clear communication that we have a soft place for you to land if you struggle, right? So I love that.
Student success tours. Also, if you're a remarkable campus and you could actually build out a great tour, put it on as an option for parents and students to opt into, because you might be surprised at the result from that. All right, so the next one that I want to talk about is at the bottom of the triangle. It's the kind of moment of truth. It's yes.
Sorry, I wanted to say one more thing that I just remembered, but I think it's very important. I just wanted to talk about this question. Do students like me graduate from here?
Oh, that's right.
Which I think is so important, because when we're considering inputs, what that question gets at is, do you guys do a good job of, after you have made the promise to me that I can be successful by accepting me, you made me that promise when you said, yes, you can come to school here. Because it's good faith, right? We're not going to admit students that we're like, you're not really going to graduate, but we just need you for a little while.
I hope not.
So you have made a promise. Forget about your guidebooks and your walk and all of that kind of stuff. When you accept a student, you're telling them you can be successful here. And the question of, do students like me, that look like me, that are first generation students, that have accessibility needs, that are women, whatever that thing is, do you graduate students like me from here? And there are going to be places at each of our institutions where the answer is no, we don't.
Yeah.
There are also going to be places where we say, absolutely, we are awesome at graduating students like you. Here's all of the things that we do that create a pathway for you to be successful. And I want to talk about that all day long, right? So like you were saying, deciding students, do deciding students graduate from here? Absolutely. Here's how we make sure that they do. Here's everything that we do, and you're going to love it. So that you've made a promise when you accept them. And the question of, do students like me graduate from here, I think are really, really weighty things for us to think about. Okay, sorry. Thank you.
So the next piece of this promise triangle is the exchange between faculty and students and staff and students. It is a lot of times a moment of truth exchange. This is the part where students decide whether or not the promises that were made are kept. And so exactly to what you're saying, if you tell me that I'm accepted, I'm believing you think I can be successful here. What resources do you have? Who can I interact with? But if you think about that, the keeping the promises, there's a whole lot that goes into that. When I think about, so a commitment to student success, what does that look like in this exchange? Well, one, that's why schools, a lot of our Ferris schools have 100% faculty completion rates on the Stoplight survey. That is an expression of a commitment to student success. In this exchange, I see my students, I know those who are most at risk, and I'm going to send in a red light on them. I love that. Also, when you think about all the things that you do, advising, trio services, the interaction in res halls with RAs, obviously in the classroom, but also things like tutoring services. We have schools where the retention rate of students who go to the tutoring services is 90%. Pretty remarkable. That is a way of demonstrating that commitment to student success. And then also, as you talked about earlier, with financial aid. So what are we doing when a student comes in and they say they can't pay their bill? How do we respond to them? Do we have empathy? Are we responsive? Do we assure them that they can be successful and we're going to help them find resources to help them stay, right? So when I think about this, we all know the people matter, the people that you hire matter, the people on your team matter, and the people engaging those students, having that heart for the work. For most of our schools, we see a deep personal commitment to that. And so that's not typically the issue. The drive to serve. Sometimes you have duds, but mostly we have high achievers who really want the best. And in this exchange, going back to our student success funnel, the role of measurement in this is really important, because when we have success, like tutoring is 90% retention, we need to then communicate that back to the institution so that they can deliver that news as they're making promises and bring awareness to the great work that's going on. So
yeah, I think of this as like where the rubber hits the road, meets
absolutely.
the road. Where it's like, we're telling this thing, but every time an employee or a staff member connects to a student and solves a problem, that is its own thing. And maybe we talked about it, maybe we promised it, maybe we didn't, right? But it is these one-on-one or small group, or anytime you have that connect and solve piece between an employee, an actual person, and the student. And I think that it's such an important, so Matt, as you said, like people in higher ed really believe in the work. We have to be reminded of it sometimes. But I would say the distinction I would make between an institutional promise, like this is what we expect you to do, and then my delivering on it, and how so many of us, we just do good work because we love it and we want to do it. And that's a personal commitment. Maybe the institution isn't talking about it and maybe they're not resourcing it, but I am personally committed to being present with my students, seeing them and helping them. Yeah. And the difficulty with it not being an institutional commitment is that people will say Rachel was awesome at her job, but that this institution really didn't do a great job, right? So, and we have had that experience where it's like, this advisor is doing a great job, but it is not indicative of how I've been treated generally by the institution. So it's a really interesting piece where you have personal commitment versus institutional commitment in that person-to-person and engagement.
So I wanted to end on this last piece, which is, the side of the triangle, that's the interaction between the institution and faculty and staff. And this is where you're enabling the promise. And it does come down to moving beyond personal commitment, the people at the bottom who are engaging the students in that moment of truth. And it looks at, is the institution invested in this? Are they driving, showing a commitment to student success beyond just burning up employees, right? And
Which, can we just pause there for a minute? Because you and I have talked about this many times, that when you work at a place where you have personal commitment, but you are not being resourced, the promises are not being enabled, people get burnt out, because it's not just a job that we go to and we do a thing and we go home. We really believe in it. We are personally committed to it. And so we do get spent. We are spending people if we are not spending money resourcing the things that they are trying to accomplish, right? And so I think thinking about the last almost 2 years, how we're just piling on more stuff with COVID and more stuff and more stuff and more stuff. I think so many people are just feeling like, man, I would really like to get some resourcing of the promise besides my personal commitment to doing good work and helping our students, because it's exhausting, right?
Yeah. So I'm thinking about this again. I guess I'm hammering it, but the student success tour. What are you doing on that tour? What are you talking about? Well, this is a part of that. How is the institution enabling the promise of student success? And so when you look at, as you and I talk about this, what is the system for student success? What are all of the resources? How is the institution investing in it besides the people on the front lines? So looking at, of course, with people, is the institution hiring, training, equipping people with what they need and the right people. I love a friend of mine who's joining us today sent me a job description from an institution, and I love it because it's like they know who they are, they know what they're wanting to accomplish and how they want to engage students, and they're shaping their questions around that. And so that higher training, rewarding people is so important, not just watching them burn out. And then when we talk about processes, the process of an unpaid balance matters. The process of registration. How do we get students who aren't familiar with college registration? How do we prepare that so that we can have a great experience for them? And as we look at retention by res halls, what's the process for how we fill a res hall? What's the mix there? All of that should be shaped around we need to enable student success. So we're going to make good decisions. We're going to craft our processes the right way. And then, as you and I, of course, with technology, how are you going to be able to manage all of these things? Not just early alert, but overall student success, not for first-time freshmen, but all the way through to graduation. How do we measure that? All of the other things that have been added to your plate with things like conduct and now COVID, right? And then ultimately, your investment in spaces. So is this a student success basement, or is this a student success center? Or
Matt, you have to explain the reason you're saying that is because when you and I worked at an institution, we were in the basement and we would have cricket invasions where I would be trying to do advising with the student and there would be a cricket climbing up the wall and I would have to be like, excuse me for a minute, let me kill it. It didn't inspire a lot of confidence, that we were like high real estate areas.
That is true.
That is true.
So would you put it on the tour? That's the question.
Right. For sure. So another part of this resourcing the promise is how can we tell? So in the same way you're talking about spaces, like what is tangible evidence? What are things that we can see and touch that tell us this is something we are committed to, that we are interested in, that we are investing in, right? And you have a great example of what was it when you first took over advising for the College of Business?
Yeah. So yes. So when I was the director of the Career Development Center for the College of Business, advising was a part of that. And my student workers we had these great degree plans that students would be able to use, tangible. They'd be able to use that to register for classes and to know what their path was. But the student workers were making copies of it on salmon colored paper, crooked. And it's like, okay, so for the next 4 years, this is what I have to like show progress and guide me along.
For the thousands of dollars that I'm paying for this very important degree, I've got a crooked degree plan.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem like a huge thing, right? But it does. When you hand me that piece of paper, I'm going to be like, oh, this is not important.
This just doesn't seem as significant as it should. So that was an easy fix for us. Like, hey, we need these to look great, high quality, thicker paper, something a student would be, not
happy.
Crumple up.
Yeah.
They'd be happy to have. So
it's such a great example of the institution being able to give you what you need to communicate and actually be resourced, right, for this piece. So I'm really curious. We actually have a poll question that's around this idea of if you were going to improve student success, and let's put the triangle back up so you can see it, you would invest more in either making the promise, so what the institution is telling students and parents, delivering on the promise, which is what faculty and staff are doing when they're engaging with students, or resourcing the promise, enabling the promise, which is the institution giving you what you need to be able to do. So let's see. A vast majority resourcing the promise, and then delivering on the promise. I think our schools are pretty good at making the promise. They have invested a lot of time and energy in making sure that they can tell that story, rightfully so, because our schools do a lot of really amazing things. But definitely, I think resourcing the promise is a place where we can have some frustration about the things that we need that we're not getting. So,
well, I appreciate the responses to that. It's so important. So you'll see, there are little lines on each side of the triangle to just say they have to be in alignment, equal, because if you have an oversighted, we're making a lot of promises, but we're not good at keeping them, and we're really not good at enabling, then you're going to have a retention problem, right? Because what that shows is a lack of commitment to student success.
yeah.
And so just looking at, okay, how do we make sure all of these sides know the same things? We're not telling students something that isn't true. We're not telling faculty they have to do something that we're not enabling them to do. So all of these things, bringing that together and being kind of an equal resourcing for each side of this triangle is one of the ways that as Tinto starts off with commitment, why it's important. This is a way to be able to communicate across campus your commitment to student success.
Yeah, I love that. I was thinking about last week how I asked everybody, your action item was, I want you to think about your inputs. I want you to think about the students that are coming in and to talk about, these are the kinds of students that we have. They're athletes. They are academically underprepared. They are coming from far away. So on the left side of your page, you would have all of those inputs written down. And then we were talking about institutional factors that you should be able to draw a line from students who don't have a major to the discovery program, right? And say, this is the way that we are resourcing that group of students.
Yeah.
And that for any one of those inputs, if you draw a line to the right side of your page and there's nothing to write there, that's a place where we need to start focusing on. But I was thinking, Matt, a way to add to that even further then is to look at all of those institutional supports that you have and to write out how those things are being enabled. What is the tangible evidence? Do you have enough people? Do you have a space? Do you have what you need? Thinking about when I inherited our program for students who didn't have their major yet. First of all, somebody said like, hey, now you're in charge of this program. And I literally could not find any evidence of what the thing was. I couldn't find like a list of students that were associated with it. I didn't have any space. There was no marketing material. There was like a paragraph in the student handbook about what this thing was, but that's all there was.
Yeah.
And I remember spending weeks going around to different people and saying, help me understand. I'm glad we have this name, but there is no resourcing this thing that you think is so important. And then slowly building, like, here's what I need. I need marketing and I need space and I need people and I need, in order to then make an impact on this group of students. So I think it would be really interesting to draw a line from inputs to then resources, and then what is the way that we're making sure that those resources can be successful.
And I would add to that, Rachel, when you say resources, not this year, but for the long term.
Yeah.
The long-term investment, because if you're just saying, well, here are resources for this program this year, but you're not invested in this program for the long run, then it's not a commitment.
So I am really excited actually about being able to use the Promise Triangle to talk about whether or not an institution is committed. Because I think, remember, we're talking about those like made up, like, yes, and we're going to increase our retention this much, and we're going to improve student success this much, but actually being able to say, okay, well, here are the triangle that is going to help us make sure we're investing in the right places. And how are we going to then invest in long-term resourcing? How are we going to invest in our people? And how are we going to make sure we're telling the right things? I see that you're sharing your screen, but I can't see anything. It's black. Can you start?
Really?
Nope. There we go. Yep. It's back down.
Right.
Okay. So my action items for you guys is I would draw this triangle and I would think about where you can point specifically to a thing on any one of these sides. So I was thinking about, in making the promises, you can point to your visit days and your guidebook and your website and your orientation, all of those things that are really connected to how we are making the promise to student. Matt, did you have something you wanted to add to that? Okay.
No.
And then along the bottom, you're thinking about delivery, how we actually keep the promise. As Matt said, that's going to be classes and office hours and advising and all of your special programs and financial aid, anytime that you have that person-to-person engagement. And then on the left side, as you are looking for resources, not just in short term, but really for a long-term commitment to improving retention and student success, we're thinking about things like salaries and people and spaces, tangible evidence, time, processes, technology, workload. And I think writing down really specifically on your campus, those different elements in that triangle may help you not just articulate maybe some frustration or the places where you need to shore some things up, but also just help you see it in a really clear way, which is why I like this framework, to be able to say, wow, we do a great job in this piece, but we're not doing so well in this, and we need to have better conversations around that. So that is your action item for commitment.
So next week, you're talking about expectations.
Next week, I will be talking about expectations, and these are expectations that we place on students. So it's going to be really interesting to talk about kind of the, there's this play between our responsibility and what we are doing, but also how we invite students into that process. And we show them a lot of respect by saying, hey, we need to do these things. I was just talking to someone the other day, and they said that they were put in charge of the student conduct office at an institution, and they immediately changed the name to students' rights and responsibilities, which I love, because you know how much I love language. And so just being able to say, like, hey, yes, conduct, like, of course, but really, you have a lot of rights, but we also have expectations. You have responsibilities. So it's going to be really good to talk about that next week.
Great.
Thank you guys for joining us. I hope that you are able to find some calm in the middle of this startup in the rhythm of the academic year. I know it's really exciting to have your students on campus. It's also very stressful, and there are a lot of them. So we are thinking about you. And if there's something that we can do to be helpful to you, please let us know. And have a great day.
Have a great day. Thanks, Rachel.
Thanks.